Everyone, so this time I'm working on a sunrise in soft pastels. This was actually one of my own photos that I took on my way to work one morning. Stopped at a stoplight and saw this beautiful sunrise coming up. Decided to take a quick pic and go on my way again. So there was actually road in this original photo, of course. I wasn't driving on a lake. But I did use a little creative license and edited that out and made it into a lake scene to make it a little more interesting. So for this project I used UArt 400 sanded papers, which is one of my favorite papers for soft pastels. I did use Liquitex acrylic inks for the underpainting, though I don't have the video of that section apparently. I used a few different colors, I believe, a red, a yellow ink, and I think a blue as well. The underpainting for this one really kind of came out a little ugly, so honestly I probably would not have done that again given the choice, but I did end up covering most of it up since I didn't want to waste the paper, and it actually came out, okay in my opinion. So what I usually try to start with is lay in my darks first, so you can see I masked in the dark areas where the trees will be. And now I'm just playing around with some of my sunrise colors, and you'll see me change my colors a few times. I'm not entirely sure exactly which pastels I'd like to use, even though I am testing them on a scrap piece of paper. Sometimes it looks a little different when you get it into a larger scale on the project. So you'll see me use some various yellows, oranges, pinks, purples, and some light blues as well. And I'm kind of using the pastels themselves to mix everything together. You won't really see me blending with my fingers very much. And I'm carving into the trees a little bit with the pastels for the sky to help shape those trees, rather than drawing the trees on top of the sky. So I don't have to go by my reference photo exactly. Obviously, I'm changing it up quite a bit since this is a lake instead of a road. But I don't have to follow the clouds that are in the sky. I don't have to follow the exact colors that are in the sky. I'm using this more as just inspiration for, what I want to play around with today. And for the dark areas of the trees, I believe I used a dark purple to start, using a few dark reds, dark greens, basically a few different colors but the same value, just to give a little interest. And I am using the pastels themselves to blend them. And towards the area in the middle where the sunlight is, I'm making sure I use a little lighter value pastels in that area since they are lit up more by the sun. And again, the exact color of those doesn't really matter. So in this area you can see I've taken an acrylic paintbrush, and I used that, it was a dry paintbrush, I used that to knock off some of the colors that I didn't think were quite working in there. I do recommend you wear a dust mask if you're going to do something like that, because it does knock a bit of pastel, quite a bit of pastel off into the air, and you really don't want to be breathing that in. So I was wearing a mask while I was doing that. But that brings back the tooth of the paper enough that I can lay more pastel over it and not blend it together so much that it looks like mud. It's kind of like giving you a fresh start, even though it does look a little ugly right now. But all of our paintings go through, what we call the ugly stage, where you're kind of doubting that it's going to end up looking the way you want it to. Try not to let it discourage you. Every single painting goes through that stage. Just keep on pushing through it. If you don't like the way that something looks, take your paintbrush like I did, knock it off, and try again. Not really sure what I'm doing at the top now with the darker colors. I don't really like the way it looks, and you will see me knock a bit more off and rework that again. Again, don't be afraid to make something that doesn't look perfect. So there's really not much of a rhyme or reason to the colors that I'm laying down in here. Basically just warmer colors towards the bottom, cooler ones towards the top. Since this is a sunrise, I want the warmer colors closer to where the sun is and the cooler colors up top where the sun has not yet reached. But the exact colors that I'm using, they don't really matter. And reinforcing my darks a little bit in the center there. Carving out a few more sky holes in the trees. And you can see after I place one of those sky holes, I use my finger just to soften it just a touch. I'm not actually blending it into the tree so much as just making it so it's not as harsh. And now I'm taking a piece of pipe foam insulation, which is something that you can get for like $1 at the hardware store. And I'm using that to drag down the dark pastel into the water, so that is kind of an easy way to get reflections without, sanding off your skin, since this is sanded paper. And I have done that, by the way. Not recommended. It's a good way to lose your fingerprints. And now I'm taking the same colors that I used in the sky and I'm placing them in the water to make it look a little more like actual reflections. And I'm trying to keep like the size of the trees that are above the horizon line pretty much the same as the size of the trees below the horizon line. You want it to be like a mirror image. And then what I'm doing is just very lightly, very, very lightly, taking a pastel for the sky color and running it over the reflections to add that little bit of shimmer to the water. And then I take the side of my finger and just blend it in very, very gently. And I keep working on this until it looks the way that I want it to. You'll see me do it a few times. Oops, sorry for my head getting in the way there. I was getting excited. Start getting into the painting. And you can see, if you look on the sides of the video, you can see all of the pastel dust that's hanging around the sides there. There's also a bunch above and below the borders of the video. It is definitely recommended to not blow that off of your artwork because you will release a lot of pastel dust into the air. And anything that is not air is not meant to be in your lungs, so please do not blow it off. You can gently tap it off with your fingers or your hands. And so I'm adding actually the sky holes that I put in the trees into the water to make it a little more genuine looking. I decided I didn't like the shape of that tree. It was too much like the tree next to it. So I used my trusty paintbrush and wiped a bit of that pastel off so I'd have a little bit more tooth to rework that area. And at this point, I'm not really looking anything like my original photo, but that is okay. If I wanted it to look like the photo, I would have just plastered the photo onto my wall instead of painting a picture of it. I do like drawing in realism as well, though, so I'm not knocking that. In this case, I just didn't want it to look like the photo because the photo was boring. Now that really dark red there, that's one of my favorite dark reds to use. That's one of the Mount Vision Pastel Company colors. I couldn't tell you the exact color off the top of my head right now, but it is a beautiful dark red that I use for a lot of my works. And they're a great pastel company in general. One of my favorites, you know, they give you a lot of pastel for your money. And they're huge pastels for really not a lot of money. And now I'm just getting to the point where I'm just making final touches and fiddling around with things. So you won't see too much change at this point. There does come a point when you will overwork a painting, so you have to kind of be careful to stop at the right point, which is sometimes difficult. Definitely difficult to know when you should stop and, you know, when the next mark wouldn't make the pastel painting any better, but would make it, you know, not as great. Um, Most artists, I think, struggle with this. I'm adding some more of those sky hole reflections into the water, smudging them just a touch with my finger. Again, I want it to be a reflection, so I want it to mirror what is above the horizon line. And doing a whole lot of nothing here, apparently. There we go. Just adding a few more vibrant areas for interest. And you could smudge all this in with your finger if you wanted it to look, you know, like a really smooth, undisturbed body of water, but I kind of like the rougher, chunkier look, I guess you could call it, more impressionistic. So I'm leaving it as is, unblended for the most part. And that's just personal preference. And here is the finished painting. If you have questions, please feel free to leave them below. Please make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, and give me a thumbs up if you like what you see, and I'll see you next time.